Next up, we have News and Views, O-scale high rail modeling. This evening, Dennis Brennan, our host for this segment, is going to talk about photo composition. You know, a lot of the photos that you see from Dennis, from myself, from the late Al Judy, and from some of the other modelers, they are not accidents. There is a methodology to composition, and there are Dennis and I had a really fascinating conversation a couple of days ago on this. We could have talked, I don't know, for hours on this. I just, again, Dennis, I thoroughly enjoyed that conversation, and I hope this evening our viewers can learn some tips. We agreed that there is some natural art to taking photographs, but by the same token, there are techniques that you can use to improve your photographs. One thing I took away, Dennis did a similar program on NewTrax a couple of years ago, and I remember distinctly he said, when you're taking a photograph, be aware of your depth of field and never have the front of your photograph out of focus. And I filed that away in my as a tip. And what I'm hoping this evening is that you too will file away a couple tips and learn a little about composition. And you'll be surprised just how the techniques are not complicated. It's really a discipline. So with that intro, Dennis, have at it.
Thanks, Tom. And yes, I enjoyed our conversation too. It's much fun for me to talk about this. All right, so let's go to the first thing. Um, we are going to talk about composition. And there's a simple rule, and it's not a hard and fast rule, but it really might help you if you feel like you're compositionally challenged. And that's called the rule of thirds. So let's go to the first slide. Okay, now this is a photograph that I took of the Sandy Harbor Railroad. And I just want you to look at it and just let it seep into your head. Look at where the engine is. Look at where all the things are. See if you can figure out what the scene is telling you. Now let's put in the rule of thirds. All right, here you go. Now, what is the rule of thirds? Well, the rule of thirds means that you'll notice that in the center of the frame, see that rectangle right in the center? Really, the subject is not there. The main subject. What is the main subject? Well, the main subject is that engine. And what's going on in the scene? We have a couple guys looking at it. We have cars that are stopped for the railroad crossing. And Tom pointed out something that I didn't ever think about in the way he said it. He said there's a certain tension created by the two cars that you see there. Why? Because they're stopped and the guy behind them is pulled up right against his bumper. And you'll notice the engine is perfectly framed between the crossing signals. Okay. Now, the rule of thirds means that you don't put an object in the center, but anywhere where there's an intersection of lines is where you can locate your subject. Now, that's not a hard and fast rule. Okay. Rules are made to be broken, but before you can break them, you have to know what they are. All right. So you'll notice that the engine is in the left third of the picture. Now, it could be up higher or lower, but compositionally, that's where it needs to be, right there. And we're going to talk about a few of the little tiny details too. Quickly, look at the little culvert on the left side of the photo on the bottom. And you also see a little pile of bricks right kind of in the center, lower center of the photo. These are all little tiny details that add so much to the scene. and the wooden fence. All right, let's go to the next slide.
Second on this, go back a second.
Yeah. All right.
One thing, Dennis, tell them that the people are staring right at the locomotive. So the
Yes.
figures are staring at the locomotive, and the track goes from the bottom right-hand corner and draws your eyes right to the locomotive, which is framed by those two crossing gates. I mean, this is no accident. So I don't mean to interrupt, but I think that's
No, that's fine.
pretty critical because this photograph, Dennis and I were talking. This is an award winner here, compositionally. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, thank you, Tom. Yes, the leading lines is something we'll talk about, and I'm glad that you brought that up. That track leads you right into it. People are looking at it. So you have to look where, your eye naturally goes there. All right. Next slide. Okay, here again. Let's just put the lines in right away. All right. Now look where the diesel engine is. That is right on that intersection, right? Now, really, this is about a lot of different things. Reflections were a main thing that I was concerned with here. Trying to get the nice reflection in the water. And nothing in these photos is ever an accident. That engine was purposely put in that position. I didn't just stop the engine and then position the camera. I find the scene, and the other thing about composition is it's not just a matter of putting something into that section. It's a matter of where is the camera? What height is the camera at? Okay. And you also have to think about balance in a photograph, positive and negative space. The negative space in this photo is really where there's not too much happening, which is where the water is. Now, what's important about the water is the reflection. But you see that that's a very simple plane. Above it is all of the information, the engine, and then the buildings in the background. Well, the engine and the buildings in the background and the bridge, that's all the positive stuff. The negative space is everything else. And there has to be a balance between the two of them. All right, next slide. All right, now here's another example of a composition that leads you right where I want you to look. Notice how the buildings are receding. Okay, I purposely, and the street is angled. We're not shooting straight on. Now, on the layout, this street also angles into it. Diagonal lines are always more attractive than a straight line. You have to always think, get out of the rectilinear world and thinking. Get out of the box and try to angle things. And that's not just using your camera to angle it, but this whole street angled right off the layout. And stage plays use the same thing. You'll see somebody walk from upstage left to downstage, or upstage right, left to downstage right, or opposite. Actually, downstage and upstage, doesn't matter. But notice again, your eye goes right from that street. You see the sidewalk and the gates. The engine is framed between the gates. Now let's put the lines in here. All right. Again, the engine is not centered. The engine, the main part of the engine is in that right middle third of the picture. Okay. And you'll notice that there isn't anything that's ever actually centered. Now, it doesn't mean you can't center something. but you have to have a good reason for doing so. And also, when you have an engine or something in the shot, always give it a little lead. Don't push the engine up against the edge of the frame. You have to give the engine somewhere to go. Next slide. Again, look at this carefully and think about what you're looking at. All right, put in the lines. All right. Now you see where the engine is? Again, now this picture is about several different things. Now the main action is the engine is pushing the flat car into the loading area, and I say that because we see that there's a gentleman on the loading dock. He's a supervisor just standing there. And then there's the guy who is unloading a piece of machinery or loading. It doesn't matter whether he's loading or unloading with the crane. Now, that part of the scene is right dead center in the frame, but that is not just the hero of the shot. That's what's going on. But you'll notice the engine is counterbalanced by the yellow truck. And look where that truck cab is. Look where the engine is. And also notice that the track and the dock and the truck and even the building leads you right into the engine. And the engine is perfectly framed by the gantry crane. Plus the tracks also lead your eye into that engine. Next slide. All right, and I think this is the last one. Is that correct, Tom?
That's correct.
All right. Again, this is, and I think there's a good reason to talk about positive and negative space here as well as composition. And that's always part of the composition. In this case, all the positive space is the dock and the engine and the tail of the boat and the crane on the dock and the buildings. But the negative space is the skyline and the water. All right. Now, the negative space really is where not much is happening. But the negative space is so important here. Look at how the water tanks and the buildings punctuate the skyline. The chimneys, the water tanks, and the buildings all give you a ragged skyline. And what does that do? That gives you a lot of feeling for depth and buildings, and it makes the scene seem a lot bigger than it actually is. Let's put the lines in here. Again, look at where the engine is. Look at where the crane is. The crane is a perfect balance to the engine. You'll notice the color. We have to look at color too. The engine is black. We got a pop of color with the red. We also have a little bit of color with the boat on the bottom left. So you can see that composition is you can help yourself if you think about dividing your photo into threes, into actually 9 parts, but using these kind of lines in your head.
Also, on this photograph, everybody should notice that if you look at the foreground, the water, and you look at the buildings in the extreme back, everything is in focus. That is not easy to do. There are computer programs that can mix 5 or 6 or 10 photographs to do that, but he did this with one shot. That's not easy to do, to have the foreground and background all in focus is an observation I made when we spoke, Dennis.
Well, and of course, that's obviously not an accident. There are some tricks to doing that. One is using this tiniest f-stop that you have. Now, this may be counterintuitive, but the tiniest f-stop is the biggest number. So you're going to see numbers from like f 2.8 to, let's say, f16 or f22. Now, if you're using a cell phone, you're probably not going to see that number, all right? But I'm a professional photographer. I use a 35 millimeter camera, and the trick is to shoot at the smallest f-stop, and then not only that, that gives you the greatest depth of field. The smaller the opening in the camera, which is the f-stop, the greater the depth of field. But it's even more than that. There's a lot of other things involved, like where do you put your camera and what lens focal length do you use? Now, I used a focal length here where it was more telephoto than wide angle. Why did I do that? Well, that's another trick in photography. A telephoto lens, if you zoom in all the way, that doesn't mean that you only get a small part of the shot. What I do is I'll zoom in, but I'll move the camera back. I'll move the camera back and zoom in to get the framing that I want. And if I don't have the framing, I'll just keep moving back until I fill the frame. Well, that also gives me greater depth of field, plus it compresses everything. And when you compress it, that makes everything look closer together. Think about when you see a baseball game televised and you see the pitcher and the catcher, and they're almost right next to each other. That's because they're using an extreme telephoto lens to shoot that. Well, for model railroad photography, it's great. A lot of people think, well, you got to use a wide angle lens because there's greater depth of field. That's baloney. I can give you depth of field with a telephoto lens the same as you can get with a wide angle lens. It has more to do with how close the camera is or how far away the camera is. I can take the same shot with a wide angle lens and then back off and get the same framing with the telephoto lens.
So Dennis, if we could, not everyone has the sophisticated equipment. Let's get two takeaways for our audience before we go. If you're using an iPhone or an equivalent, one takeaway is using the what you call the thirds here. You don't have to have your subject matter dead center. In fact, it's better to have it to the left or right in the middle third of the photo. That would be one takeaway. Give me another takeaway with an iPhone that you would suggest. A quick.
Well, think about the lens. You have control over the zoom on your lens, okay? So think about that. Don't just put the camera up and move in, and think about zooming in and then backing off if you don't get the shot that you want. Think about playing with the lens, wide angle and zoom. That's one thing. The other thing is, if you're really concerned and you want to try messing around with f-stop, there is a feature on almost every good phone that if you go into your photo app on the phone, there should be something called professional, or maybe it just says pro. If you go to pro, it gives you control over your f-stop and your shutter speed. Rather than having the camera control it, it allows you to control it. But if you do that, then you have to make sure that you put the camera on a tripod. And there are little tripods you can get for cell phones, or you can get a little device that will attach to a regular tripod. So
Dennis, one other thing that just very important for people with an iPhone, if you look closely in your viewfinder, which is your screen on your iPhone, you'll actually see they have a grid on there that is the grid of thirds. It's actually, if you open your phone up, everybody opens their phone up and look at it, you'll actually see it on an iPhone in the photo app. So when you're using it in the photo mode, you actually get that right there to use.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I don't have an iPhone, so I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, I would advise you to do that. And remember, again, it's not a hard and fast rule, but it should give you some, some place to start. Okay? Um,
All right.
Another thing that works really well with the iPhones is a stability gimbal.
Yeah.
So that it helps to compensate for movement and really gives you control over how you're holding that machine. So I recommend those a lot.
Now, Phil uses the gimbal for when we were in Pittsburgh and he took all those layout shots and
Mhm.
just makes you professional. Well, that was great, Dennis. I'll tell you, I could talk about this all day with you. I really enjoyed the subject. And again, these photographs that we present are no accident. And hopefully our viewers will now start thinking about not just taking snapshots, but just pause for a moment and think about composition and depth of field. It takes only seconds to learn this, and the improvement in your photographs goes up dramatically. Great, great presentation.
one quick thought. Think about creating a scene. Think about what the photograph tells you. So try to create a little scene with your photograph. And if that means putting a picture, a person in there or moving something, please do it.
Tell a story. That'll be another subject. We can talk about telling a story. That whole other subject. This was this was sponsored by Millhouse River Studios.
Millhouse River Studio builds model train working accessories that are made to last generations. Millhouse River products are built out of aluminum and have scale brass details that even the most demanding scale modeler will appreciate. Since our industry entry in 2009 with the introduction of our flagship turntable, Millhouse River has continued to add new, innovative products, like our scale transfer table, rotary coal dumper, flood coaling tower and, most recently, a working conveyor that transports coal from the dumper to the loader. All of Millhouse River Studio's stunningly realistic products are currently available in O scale. We are adding new scales on some products, including the upcoming release of an HO scale turntable featuring our aluminum construction and stunning brass details that is big enough to handle a big boy locomotive. When it comes to your layout, don't settle for less, get Millhouse River Studio.